This section which we are currently focusing on from 8 to 42 to 8 to 61, which is the section of nishthato naha, replacement of a nakara in place of the takara of the nishtha pratyaya. In that section, the last 5 rules, which is from 8 to 57 up to 8 to 61, is a nisheda kandam, where there is a prohibition, where this operation is not allowed to take place. And that starts from 8 to 57. Na dhya kya pru murchi madam. The anuvritti of na goes down from 8 to 57 to 8 to 61. So let's look at one sutram from this section where the substitution of a nakara in place of the takara of nishtha pratyaya is prohibited. Because of the mention of na in the sutram, which runs down up to 8 to 61. So this sutram says na dhya kya pru murchi madam, and the vritti says that ebhyo nishthatasya natvam na, which means that the substitution of nakara in place of the takara for nishtha affix does not take place. So now if you look at this sutram, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verbal roots mentioned in here, and they are dhyai chintayam, kya rakathane, palana puranayoho, murcha, which is murcha mohan samuchrayayoho, and mada, which is madi harshe. Now, in the case of the first two verbal roots, dhyai and kya, we would have had a substitution of a nakara in place of the takara of the nishtha affix when it follows one of these two verbal roots by the sutram 8 to 43. Sanyogaderato dhator yanvataha. Sanyogaderato dhator yanvataha. Because these two verbal roots, dhyai and kya, they begin with a sanyogaha. They have a yan letter in them. And remember, this dhatu dhyai is going to take the form dhya by 6145. Adecha upadesha shiti, adecha upadesha shiti. Because we know that there is not going to be any talavya shakar as a it following this verbal root. So by 6145, the ending h letter, in this case the aikara, is immediately replaced by a akara. So this dhyai becomes dhya immediately. In fact, in the sutram itself, Panini says dhya, because in this situation there is not going to be any talavya shakar as it following this verbal root. So the verbal root, the h letter of the verbal root, which is dhyaikara, takes the akara desha by 6145. So now this is how we have both dhyai, which becomes dhya, and the verbal root kya. They both end in a akara. So all the conditions for applying 8 to 43 are satisfied. So 8 to 43 would mandate that there be a nakara desha in place of the takara for nishtha pratyaya when it follows one of these two verbal roots. But now this sutram 8 to 57 blocks that operation. So if we take the example of the dhatu dhyai chintayam, as we just mentioned, by 6145 dhyai becomes dhya, and then we add the kta pratyaya by the sutram 3212 nishtha. Now remove the it letter, the kakara gets the it sanya vala shakvatadhyate tasya lopaha, and 7 to 10, which is eka cha upadeshanudatat, that stops the id agamaha, the augment it, which would have been done by 7 to 35. And now at this point 8 to 43 would have become applicable, because one more time all the three conditions on the verbal root are satisfied, because dhya ends in a akaraha. Now it begins with a sanyogaha and it has a yan letter, which is a yakara in there. So we would have had to substitute the takara of the nishtha affix, which immediately follows the verbal root. We'd have to replace that with a nakara. But now 8 to 57 comes and stops the operation. As Panini specifically says no, means don't do this substitution in the case of dhya kya pru muchi madam. So takara remains as a takara and we get the form dhyata. And of course dhyata gets the pratipadika sanya by kritya samasascha and so on. So that's the case of these first two roots, jai and kya. The remaining three roots, pru, murch, and mad, there the nakara substitution would have been mandated by 8 to 42. Radabhyan nishthato naha purvasya cha daha. But again this sutram 8 to 57 says do not apply 8 to 42 for those three verbal roots specifically mentioned here, which is Puru, Murcha and Mother. One small footnote here is that you may be wondering is how does the sutram Radabhyan nishthato naha purvasya cha daha become applicable in the case of the dhatu Murch, because that dhatu Murch as it stands is not ending in a repha, it's ending in a chakara. But what happens is that the sutram 6.4.21 ral lopaha, which we'll be studying a little bit later, that sutram comes and removes that ending chakara as well as chakaraha. So then after 6.4.21 applies, the dhatu becomes a rephanta dhatu, and at that time 8 to 42 would become applicable, and that's when we use 8 to 57 to stop that 8 to 42. So that dhatu murch also becomes a rephanta dhatu after applying 6.4.21, which we study later, and that is why we need 8 to 57 to stop 8 to 42 in the case of murch also. Okay, so now this is this Nishedha Kandam. This is the section, prohibition section, from 8 to 57 to 8 to 61, which stops this substitution of a nakara in place of the takara of a nishtha pratyaha. So please make a note of this, and please also make a note of these five verbal roots, which in the case of which we do not make the nakara substitution in place of the takara of a nishtha affix.